Niamh Wheatley, and welcome to episode 98 of the Weekly podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in, as always, for all the people who subscribe to our YouTube channel and all the other places we are. Really appreciated. Thank you very much to Anya, Lisa, for coming on last week. Always a pleasure to talk about things that I really didn't have any idea about going in. And it was very interesting, and I really enjoyed it, and hope you did too. I think I've covered all bases to start with. Yeah, subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's basically it. Our guest this week is a psychologist and an author, and she is Niamh Fitzpatrick. How are you doing, Niamh?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well. I just want to point out, if people are watching, I do have what looks like a black eye. It is not a black eye, because immediately it goes to the idea of I got a smack. Well, I didn't get a smack. It was an incident in jiu-jitsu that happened, and it's a burn under my eye. It's not a nice thing to do, but
is it sore?
It's not sore. It's a weird kind of thing. It hurts for a minute. It's not like a carpet burn or anything like that, which is kind of sting. It's just kind of like a quick. The fabric is very thick, so it just goes like that. But I just didn't want anybody, I mean, my parents mainly, to think that I got a smack. Basically, that's what I'm saying to you, Niamh. Niamh, let's go to the very beginning. Could you give us a short history of your upbringing, please?
I grew up, so I'm 53 now, so born in 1968. So quite a few years ago, when you go to scroll down now through any of the, the things where you have to put your date of birth in, and I'm scrolling a long time to find the 1968. But so I grew up in the 70s and 80s in Dublin, where we lived in quite a few suburban houses in Dublin city. And then when probably I was around 10, my parents moved out to what was a sort of country space. Now it's becoming more built up, but then it was a country space, fields. There were just fields all around us, a river at the bottom of the garden, a farm. We had the farm, and so everybody, once you're on a farm, everybody gets out and has a go. So it was all about picking stones off the land, and up on the top of those huge high straw bales or hay bales on the back of a tractor trailer. No health or safety then. It was all piled up, and there's a bunch of kids on the top of it, creosoting fences, whitewashing walls, out. It was really an outdoors childhood, I suppose, and an upbringing with the family who are very much around family and around respect and around kindness, hard work, very much hard work valued, and yeah, togetherness, ordinary stuff. Nice. Kids going off maybe to Kerry with, I don't know how they did it, but say, I want to say 6 or 7 kids, because there would be us and a couple of cousins. 6 or 7 kids in a Renault 4L. Now, for anybody who's born after 1968, you won't know what a Renault 4L is, but you wouldn't fit 6 kids in it and a couple of adults. But heading off to Kerry, so a very innocent, I would say, childhood, fun one, lovely upbringing, with the fortune to be born to 2 really good parents.
I like because I grew up in kind of a cul-de-sac in the town in Athlone, but up in Swords as well. And I've talked about on the podcast before, I moved out to a farm here, basically, when it was about 12 years ago now. And I saw maybe the idea of like farming is hard work and stuff, and you hear about it a lot. But if you don't see it, I mean, it's just, it's in the air, the words. But when you come out and you realize it and you see all the work that goes into it. But like you say, that almost like idyllic upbringing for kids to be out and about in those places and be able to be a bit freer and not to be worried about cars all everywhere and strangers, all that kind of stuff. It must be a really lovely upbringing for people, I think.
And I suppose for us, it's like anything in life. When you're in it, you don't often know any different. So we didn't have anything to compare it by or compare it to. There would have been the years up to 10 where it was like that, living where I live now, which is in an estate with houses around me, and before we got to that place with the fields. But once you're there, you don't know what to compare it to. You don't really, because that's all you know. And so that bit of, maybe in the summer, you'd be doing your chores, doing all your bits and pieces, but then in the summer, getting up, say, in the mornings and as kids, I'm one of five, and we would head off like that with our cousins. We were almost like the sort of the famous five from the Enid Blyton with a few hangers on, and you'd head off down the fields with your fishing nets, which was just a pole with a net at the end of it. There was nothing, dramatic about it. And you'd go off into that river and you'd be jumping around in the river and you'd be swimming in it and you'd be catching stuff and eating your jam sandwiches that were stuck in your pockets. There was such an innocence to it. And you wouldn't arrive home until stupid o'clock that night when it was dark. But there was no sense then of danger. There was no sense of worry about things, but it was all we knew. And I would say, as an adult now, in the world we live in now, I feel really fortunate to have lived in those innocent times. It's a privilege, to be honest.
Of course. So then, when did you first become aware of mental health, Niamh?
I would say, so when I was in school, I wanted to do law when I left school, and I missed the points. I didn't get the points. I'd worked hard, didn't get the points. So I decided I was going to go into college to do an arts degree and to go into law, the sort of side door, into Blackwell Place that way. But I picked English as one of my subjects in my arts degree because I love reading, I love writing, I love language, I love all that. I picked psychology because I love people and they fascinate me. And I picked philosophy because I was told it was an easy third subject. Okay. And I fell in love with psychology, completely fell in love. I had a lecturer at the time, Aidan Moore, in psychology in UCD, and he was utterly incredible. He remains probably the best lecturer I've ever had in my entire life. He was immense, and he just captivated me, and psychology captivated me. And I never looked at law. I never even considered law after that. So I suppose for me that would have been 1986 when I left school and started in college. So that's when that whole mental health space would have come into mind, really at that point in time. But actually within that psychology degree, the initial degree, I was looking to go on and do some piece around the sports psychology because I like this idea of the performance piece, and that came from my own sporting experience. And so I suppose I was looking at it with that lean. I ended up doing the degree in psychology, master's in clinical psych, and master's specializing in sports psych. And now my work would sort of center in those two spaces. So, the mental health bit came in somewhere in the middle of all of that.
This is kind of I don't know, maybe it's obviously a simple question for you, but for people who haven't been, I've been to a psychologist, quite a bit a few years ago, and found them to be really helpful, but if someone asks me what a psychologist is, I may not be able to answer it correctly. I can answer what they did for me, but not what they are exactly. So what is a psychologist?
I would say that's a brilliant question, because it's one of those things where there's not going to be a definitive answer. If we look at attempts within even psychology to define certain terms, we can't always agree on different things. So this would be my perspective on it. Is a psychologist who's somebody who is qualified, trained, experienced in that space around emotions, cognition, behavior, and how we really interact with all of those in our world. So whether it's a world that's a performance world, a sporting world, whether it's a world that's to do with your relationships, maybe it's to do with your work piece, maybe it's to do with your personal sense of self or confidence, or maybe it's to do with anxiety, depression. It's really looking at all of that piece around the emotions, around the cognitions, around the behaviors, and all of the things that, if you like, make us us. What makes you as a person? What makes somebody else them as a person? Just helping them navigate that place when at the times that we need it in our life. Is that the best definition of who a psychologist? I don't know, but it's the one that comes into my mind when you ask me it, so I'm going to run with it.
Oh, well, to be honest, I think it's an excellent answer, and when I think about being, seeing a psychologist, when I had the opportunity to do it, and I had done it kind of in conjunction with CBT, which I found very, very helpful. But there was kind of a certain pattern to that part of it, when I went into that therapist, I should say, with the H. But when I went to a psychologist, it was like what you're saying to me there is kind of when I was talking. Fiona was the name of the first psychologist I went to see, and it was the first time that I realized that I could speak about pretty much anything that went on previously. And sometimes it wasn't. Some of the stuff didn't appear to be part of the bigger problem. It may have been, to me, seemingly throwaway stuff that I was talking about when I was a kid, or around that time, whatever it was. But everything started to kind of be pieced together by Fiona. So it was like I was laying out this jigsaw, messing everything up, and she was helping me to put it back together. And that was like, it was my kind of, if someone asked me what it was, that's about the best I could do with regards to it. But it was being given the space in the first place was the most important thing for me. And I think for all the professionals that I've been to, I think they've given me that space. I wanted to ask you really about like the actual space. There's an approach I had with a couple of different psychologists. One sat the other side of the room, there was loads of space between us, and I felt very, very comfortable. Another psychologist was right next to me, and that, obviously that was their approach. And to me, that seemed to kind of shut me off a little bit. I wasn't quite comfortable in the space. What is your approach in those terms?
Well, I would feel that bit that you and Fiona did was that you together pieced all that. So you said she pieced it together. No. You did that with her. It's a collaborative piece. I would see it very much as a collaborative piece. And I think she probably did that too. And so therefore, because of when we think of that collaboration piece in the psychology space, for me, actually, I like to give somebody some space. Okay. So I don't personally sit near to them. They don't need a megaphone to speak to me either. But and I suppose there are some people who would suggest, because I see people from home at the moment, everything is still on Zoom. But when I see people from home, there's actually a table between us. And some people would say, oh gosh, surely a psychologist, you're supposed to sit on the couch, the other person on the other couch. I find it's quite relaxed. Clients come into my home and they bring their takeaway coffee and they sit and they are quite relaxed and quite comfortable, but there is a good bit of space between us, and they do have that room to feel whatever they feel, because what you want in that space is it needs to be safe. You said that those therapists or that those people I've been to have given me a space. I would say they gave you what sounds to be a safe space to speak about all of those things you need to speak about. So I think that's going to be a personal thing. I also have gone to different psychologists, psychotherapists for different things over the years in my life. And I've found that too. Some will sit nearer. If I have a choice, I will always probably pick the place on the seat that's furthest from them, because like you, I like that space. So maybe that's influencing what I do with people. I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think it's what's right or wrong for you. But I think for anybody to be able to feel in the therapy room that it's okay for them to say, do you know, I'm just going to move over here because I just feel like I need a little bit more space in here. That's okay to do that.
It's funny though, Niamh, when you go into a space like that and you see the psychologist, and it's like when there's an authority figure, when we see doctors or whatever it might be, and we are afraid to kind of speak up a little bit to maybe say that, like just to say, I like the space, and it gives me that space, gives me permission, then gives myself permission to be a lot more open. But when someone's in on top of me, it feels a lot more closed, and I'll close up a little bit as well.
Yeah, well, so from the psychologist's point of view, I see that as that's our role. I would see that, very strongly, that it's my role to really create that space for somebody to feel comfortable enough to say, I'd really like to sit over there,
Yeah.
and not to have somebody, I need to be able to look at somebody, see them, notice. I should notice, this is my opinion again, and it's how I work. It's not how it should be done. But my feeling is that I need to notice if somebody is uncomfortable. It shouldn't come from them to say.
Yeah.
So often as somebody will do something, and a psychologist will say, so that seems to be bringing something up for you. Or I notice, I might say to somebody, so I see your hand going to your throat, or I see your hand going to your chest, or your hand going to your stomach. Tell me about that. So what you're doing is you're noticing. Remember, it's about the emotions, it's about the cognitions, it's about the behaviors, it's about the reflections. So as the therapist, as the psychologist, you want to be watching the person, not in a weird, creepy way, but watching the person and seeing these things. And part of that then is going to be about, a huge part of that is creating the rapport and creating the environment and providing the space where, beyond doubt, they feel comfortable enough to say whatever they need to say. That's as much a part of our job as any tool or strategy we have.
When it comes to something like performance psychology, it's very interesting to me as someone who's never been a peak level athlete. I don't mind saying that.
Yes, Derek. Yes.
Yes. There we go. I like it. But so you've worked with some really like elite level athletes. How does performance psychology work?
It's about understanding that if you think about this in sport, so somebody has a talent in their sport, they have a capability, they have a leaning towards it, they have a skill set. And what they do is, and they have an interest, usually they have an interest. And what they do is they develop their skills within that space. So they develop the technical skills of their game or their sport, the fitness skills of their game or their sport, maybe the cohesion skills if it's a team sport. What's different on the day of competition from the days of training? An audience, a clock, one chance, the M&M, one chance, one opportunity. There's all of these pieces, maybe expectations. There can be history in there. There can be, the consequences. If I kick this point, then we win the game. There's all of these kind of things. And so the piece around, if needing to be able to deliver your physical fitness skills, your technical skills, your tactical strategies under the circumstances of the clock and the audience and the one shot, if that's a feature of sport, or I would stretch that out and say that's, you mentioned quite correctly, performance psychology. So, it could be on the stage, it could be theatre, music, anything like that. Driving tests, it's all the same. If that's going to be a feature, well, then you need to train for that. So there's a sports psychologist called Dr. Terry Orlick, and he says that an athlete hoping to distinguish themselves in competition without first having systematically mentally trained is like hoping God will come down at halftime and turn the game around. And then another psychologist said, but what if God's at another game?
Yes.
So it's understanding that what you're really doing, if you're not paying attention to the mental and emotional side of your sport, is you're leaving out a key ingredient. Why would you do that? Now, here's the thing. Does everybody need a psychologist in the performance space? No, of course not. But does everybody need to pay attention to their mind, to their emotions? Does everybody need to know how to bounce back from failures, how to build their confidence, how to handle pressure, how to compose the body, how to focus the mind? Yes. How you figure that out is up to you. The psychology piece is just training that maybe the way the physical skills coach will train that side of things.
I remember it's a number of years ago, maybe 20 years ago, which in sport terms is not a long time. And they were talking about these teams were getting, coaches in, psychologists in to talk to the players. And everybody was kind of kind of dismissive of it, thinking, you know what, these elite level athletes, they shouldn't need these, psychologists coming in. And what you explained there is, it's kind of going back to, I talked to Brittany Hogan from the Irish rugby team recently, and I asked her about the disappointments, that you mentioned as well, like the idea of, say, walking down that tunnel after a match, after a loss, a big heavy loss, in a big game. How do you feel after it, and how do you carry it through to the next game? That's the kind of the bigger picture. It seems to be really common sense that teams and players and federations would look after their players in that sense, but it seemed to take a long time to get to that point.
I think a lot of it comes from a medical model. So there's a sense when you say, as soon as you say, the ologist. So at the moment, say in the pandemic, it's not necessarily huge party season. So, but if at the time pre-COVID, and once we're in a better space with this, it will happen again when we're out and about. If I'm out and about somewhere and the conversation comes round to, so what do you do? And I say I'm a psychologist, you kind of get the eyes widening a little bit. You'll usually get that. So can you tell me what I'm thinking? Or there's that interest in it. I have this problem. Can I tell you about it? And there's loads of kind of things sort of like that will come up. But that psychologist piece, maybe because it links in some people's minds with psychiatrist, it can bring people to the place of the medical model, which is that, we go to a doctor when there's something wrong. So the thinking before might have been around, well, why would these squads need a psychologist to come in? Is that not indicating that there's something wrong with these players or these athletes, that there's something missing, something lacking? And of course, it's just not understanding that that's not the case at all. It is simply a piece, to use your expression earlier, of the jigsaw puzzle.
There was another kind of question again off the back of that, I guess, and it's the mind kind of working against us, because it can work against us at every turn, especially if we're feeling particularly low or anxiety is very high and stuff. Can that kind of treatment with relation to performance anxiety help us in other aspects of our life?
100%. We are not compartmentalized in our life. So I always think when I'm going to deal with anything with an athlete, you come to that pitch, you come to that sports scenario, the pool, the court, as a person first. So whatever you learn in that place for you as a person, you're going to bring into, or you can bring it, you can choose not to, but if it's good stuff that you learn, why wouldn't you bring it in with you? You bring it into that sporting environment, but also you bring some things in from the sporting environment into other areas of your life. So for example, I might have started out doing more work in that performance space, but then somebody that I would have worked with, or a team that I would have worked with, somebody said, well, that stuff that you did with me around my hurling or my golf or whatever it was, could you come into my company and talk to them about this? Can we talk about, cohesion and communication and all of those things that we talk about on the sports field? So absolutely the skills transfer over. And I think what's important for us to know as people is that we grow and we develop and we, evolve as human beings all the time. So the great thing about the psychological skills and the performance psychology is it is a skill set. So wherever the baseline is, we can learn, we can move. An awful lot of my work would be psychoeducational work. It's helping somebody understand, what's going on with you when you feel anxious? Is there something wrong with that? I mean, I spend a lot of my time helping people understand that anxiety, the system around anxiety, is one that we will not be turning off and getting rid of. We might want to work on some pieces around when it's activated and whether that's appropriate. If you think of in your house, you might have a smoke alarm. Well, sometimes the smoke alarm can go off because there's a fire, but sometimes the smoke alarm might go off because you're burning toast. And it becomes a bit around with the anxiety piece, understanding this and assessing, is this a fire or am I burning toast? And learning about your body systems and learning about your emotional world and your cognitive world and the impacts, the influences on them, and understanding what to do in those situations. And it is an utter privilege. And it's a word I don't use lightly. It's an utter privilege to see that develop in clients. And you see people and they can grow. And I say to them, it's my job and your job to make me redundant.
Yeah. It's an interesting profession when you think of it that way, isn't it? But let me just read an ad, Niamh, if you don't mind, and we'll get back into it. So let me get this right. Fusion Training Centre, Monksland, Athlone, a place to train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, martial arts and CrossFit. A great atmosphere with experienced coaches and a real sense of community. If you want to join the team, find us on Facebook at Fusion Training Centre or drop in for a chat. Fusion Training Centre, train like a warrior. Okay, that's that part done.
Well read.
Oh, thank you very much. Not many people say it. So I guess there's a lot of people around the time, and I know you're doing Zoom at the moment, like I guess like most people, dealing with anxiety and depression, and I'm sure it's being cranked up with every kind of news day that passes by. How can you approach those clients? And I know you said there's a table between you, but how can you approach those clients through Zoom? Did you have to adapt to that as well?
Yeah. So I'm a psychologist for 30 years this year, and I would have been asked several times before over the years, at that stage it was Skype, did I do Skype consults? And I always said, and the honest answer is I always said at the time, look, I really feel like I need to be in the room with somebody. That would have been at the start of my career. And then as I began to do pieces of work, I was the psychologist for 3 Olympic Games with the Irish Olympic team. And there were times where I would be at a training camp and an athlete would be at another training camp in another country, or might have gone ahead of me into the Olympic village. And I would have to do some work with them on the phone. I'd never met them. And I suppose you learn quite quickly around those skills about building a rapport. And you start to realize that whilst it might be in some ways preferable to be in the room, sometimes it's not necessary. And sometimes it's not even preferable. It's entirely possible. So when the Zoom thing came in, I really wasn't sure where it was going to go at all. But what I found is it has been such an incredible... I want to use the word success, but it feels slightly the wrong word, but I can't find another one yet, so we'll go with it. It's been such an incredible success for clients that they've said to me, when you do go back to in-person sessions, will you still leave me the option of a Zoom consult? So I'm speaking to you now from a room in my house that I specifically just have. I've got my standing desk. I'm standing now as I'm talking to you. I have my standing desk. And I have it all set up. So, if when I do go back to in person, my first client is an in-person session, my next client might be a Zoom session. I'm not taking up a laptop, putting it down, putting it on the box. But that idea that people will say, I don't have to travel to see you. I mean, other people would travel from quite a ways around the country, and they don't have to spend a day traveling. Or people will say, sometimes I just like to sit in my own house and I can feel more comfortable in my own house with some things. Yeah. Of course, it works the other way. There are times when people don't have privacy, and doing a Zoom session in their house is not what they need. They need to get out of their home. They need to get into, say, MySpace. And that's okay too. But it has really surprised me to the point that I now, going forward, will absolutely be offering Zoom even when I do go back to the in-person sessions. And I think that bit around helping somebody feel okay in that space is making sure that they're safe. So even basic things like, I always wear headphones. I wear headphones that are visible. If I happen to be wearing a pod and stuff, I will say I've got them on so they know nobody else is hearing what I'm saying, what they're saying, just me. And making sure they're safe their end and they're comfortable their end. saying to somebody, look, this may be for you, it might not, let's see where we go. If you want to stop in 10 minutes, or if you want to stop in 50 minutes, or if you never come back, that's going to be okay. For me, the bit is interesting with the Zoom piece is it sounds a bit of an odd thing to talk about, but I think it's important, is the bit about where you look. So obviously, if I'm doing a talk, I have a talk to do tomorrow, an online talk. When I'm doing that talk, I will speak to the camera. I will look where I'm looking now, which is at that camera really up at the top, or somewhere in that screen. So I'm looking face in at the screen. But when I'm working with a client, I look at their eyes. So even now, I'm looking at your eyes. So I'm clearly not looking head on in the space. I need to see your face. I need to see what's going on really with you. And I think that bit is really important. I think understanding the piece around space and allowing somebody to speak and then pausing and just letting that space sit there and just having somebody feel really comfortable in that space and building that rapport. I mean, it's incredible to think that I have a group of clients that I have never met.
Yeah.
We've never sat in the one room.
That's pretty strange.
If you'd have told me that 30 years ago when I started out and saw my first client, that you will one day have people who you have never met, I would have said, what is wrong with you? What are you talking about? But here we are. So I think people adapt. We've all adapted. It's been, and it continues to be, such a difficult time for everybody. But look at how incredible human beings are. Look at what we've adapted to.
It's true. It's true. We don't necessarily think like that, which is,
Exactly. So what I keep trying to say to people is, I'd love you to see yourself through your own eyes, of course, but I'd love you to see yourself as I see you, because what I see is people who, they were minding their own business. They're living their life. March 2020 comes along. It's like we're catapulted into the middle of a disaster movie. I expect to see Ben Affleck and some balls of fire running through. I mean, it has just been catastrophic. Yeah. And how we have changed the way we work, the way we live. The time we were reduced to 2K around our homes. You look at even how we mourn our dead. The rituals around wakes and funerals changed. Everything we have done has changed. And for me, it is really important to acknowledge, and for people to acknowledge, that it doesn't matter if it's pretty. It doesn't matter if you've gained a stone or three. It doesn't matter if things don't look, easy or comfortable, or, as I said, pretty or perfect in your life. What matters is that you acknowledge that I am navigating one of the toughest times in living memory, and stop and realize that that's the you who will go out into the sports field, or that's the you who will go back into the office building if that's where you go, and to accept that you've learned things about yourself in this time of pandemic that you might not have known before. That's really key.
Yeah, it's massive. And I think I have learned things about myself and kind of acknowledged it. But I often wonder, is the reason for it to do with seeing, a psychologist at times and other forms of therapy that I've had as well, and that I can go back on things. I think that's really important as well, especially for me, who's been through certain treatments, that I can go back and dig into things, and kind of like CBT is another one where you kind of can look and go, well, I've maybe not faced this exact scenario, but there's something there that has been quite similar that I've been able to see through because of this. And I think that's very rewarding about being in treatment, in therapy. And for you, so you say now it's going to be 30 years that you're doing it.
30 years this year.
30 years this year. So with all the kind of, advancements in, you can pick up, how many books can you pick up about depression and treatment for depression and anxiety? Have you seen big changes in how it's going? And also, have you changed your approach to it?
Yes and yes.
Right. Okay.
In that I think we need to evolve. Our thinking evolves. Our understanding evolves. Being at that place where we are now, and we know that we can, as human beings, stop and notice and observe where we're at emotionally, where we're at cognitively, and have an awareness and sort of say, that's interesting. Today I'm really being bothered by, stressed by, triggered by X, Y, and Z. That's a huge thing to be able to do. We move ourselves to a space now where we don't have to be right stuck in the middle of whatever that thing is that's going on in our head. We can stand back a little from it. We can observe it. We can get a little bit of space from it. And in that space, as the line says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in that response lies freedom and growth. So it's helping people to understand that piece, that when we can stop, take a breath, notice, be curious, observe, be aware. They're all huge skills that I probably think, when I started out on, they wouldn't be skills that had such a great space as they do perhaps now. And I think you have to evolve. I read and read and read. I go into bookshops and I pick up books and I smell them. I just love the smell of books. And I think that piece around reading something and then letting your head stop for a while and process it, and it sets off a chain of thoughts in your own mind about things, and that growing and developing and understanding is just immense in this field. And I because I think we have to be of that mindset that it's possible, change is possible, or understanding is possible, or acceptance is possible. And to do that, we must grow, we must evolve, we must develop somewhere. So I suppose for me, it goes hand in hand with the profession. And if I didn't believe in change and evolution, I couldn't do this job.
Yeah. That's
and I say job, actually, it's not a job. I'm gonna row back on that word. I couldn't do this work, but it's not even work. It's, like I said, it's a privilege to do it.
Very good. That's a really lovely way of looking at it, actually. And for your clients as well, I would imagine that it's a lovely way to hear rather than a job, which is kind of a cold kind of thing.
That's it. It's funny you say that. As soon as I said the word, I realized the feeling that goes with that word doesn't fit what I do. So if I win that, I have to buy a ticket first, but if I won that 19 million euro rollover lotto jackpot, I will still be doing this.
Yeah. By the time this podcast come out, you might have won it, because it's down. You never know. Listen, why did you write Tell Me the Truth About Loss?
So I wrote that book because of several reasons. The first reason, so my sister Dara died overnight in March 2017. I had gone to bed and I had 4 siblings, and I woke up and one was missing, and Dara was one of the Irish Coast Guard Rescue 116 crew, and they crashed off the coast of Mayo on a rescue mission. And about 6 hours later, after that phone call at 6 a.m, sometime around 12 o'clock that day, we heard the news that Dara's body had been recovered from the water and she had died, along with the other 3 crew that was soon to be found. And so the grief was immense, is immense. It's like Dara is my sister, and we were sisters on this earth for 45 years, and it feels like a piece of me is missing. And the overwhelmingness of that was just, it was so loud in the initial stages. The grief is so loud, it's so big, and it was nothing like I imagined it to be as a psychologist. Grief as a sister was nothing like I imagined it to be as a psychologist. And so that was one of the reasons. Another reason was I figured out so much along my way, and psychology had maybe given me a head start on some of that figuring out. It did nothing. My profession did nothing to shield me from the pain. It probably helped me not make it worse. And I often say, if you can't make it better, at least don't make it worse. So there was something there about maybe being comfortable with emotions, even the uncomfortable emotions, even the ugly feelings, and allowing myself to feel that. And it just meant that I didn't, in some ways, make what's such a terrible situation in some ways worse for myself. I allowed myself to feel all those awful feelings. I also wrote it because I recognized in the feelings of pain for Dara that these felt familiar to me. Yeah. But yet I'd had people in my life who had died before, but nobody like this, nobody in this sense, nobody with this feeling. And a couple of years before Dara died, I had been married. I'm not now, but I had been married at the time, and we had gone through fertility treatment that hadn't worked, and we hadn't been able to become parents. And I realized in my grief with Dara that those feelings that I feel for her, that I had felt before around the fertility, but the infertility, but I realized that I'd never named them as grief before because nobody had died. And I thought, well, is this other people? Are there other people there who have losses in their life that are losses not around death, that may not be recognized as losses, therefore may not be acknowledged, therefore may not be supported? And so that's why I wrote Tell Me the Truth About Loss, because one of the truths is, loss and grief aren't only about death. They are about change and loss in our life. And it's really for all those reasons. But I think if Dara hadn't died, would I have written the book? No, definitely not. But if Dara hadn't died, I wouldn't have recognized those other losses as loss. And it was really all of those together. And I suppose the last bit is, it feels to me as a psychologist helping other people with their emotional world, that who would I be if I was living and am living this life dealing with such huge emotions and I don't ever speak about it? There's just something about that. I had been on radio with Neil Delamere and Today FM at the time that Dara died, and I had to take, obviously, time off work. And when I went back, it just didn't feel right to go back and say nothing. The listeners knew I was Dara's sister. And it felt that piece around something inauthentic about helping others with their emotions, but never speaking about your own. Yeah. And so for the answer to why did I write it is probably all of those.
Can it be because it was kind of played out obviously in the national, arena, and it's in the news headlines and papers and TV. I don't know how, how people respond to grief is different, but I don't know how people respond to grief when everybody knows the reason for the grief and there's kind of no hiding from it. Like, I don't understand how you could do that.
So I think there's a difference there. So there's a difference between, grieving in private, but speaking about grief in public. So sometimes people will say to me, but, which is, I think, a version of what you're saying there, but how do you grieve in public? But you don't, as in I don't, I choose what to speak about. I choose what to share. And I get emails, cards, messages, on a daily basis from people saying, my child died by suicide and I read your book and I understand some more now of my feelings. Or my mom died and my dad and I have never spoken. We don't talk about it, and your book has come up and now we're talking about it. And so the reason that I share some of those pieces is I understand the things I struggle with. And I say that in the present. It's not just a past struggle that I struggle with the grief piece, that others have that struggle too. And so that's why I share that piece. But do you share everything, or do you all your grieving in public? No. So that's I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It certainly does. And I suppose the extension of that then is like when you were writing the book, was it cathartic like it is when you're talking to someone?
It was equally cathartic and one of the toughest things I have ever done. It felt like in some ways, it felt like a public therapy session in that I am laying bare some of those really toughest pieces around that grief bit. I finished writing just before COVID. So sort of January 2020, I was handing it to the publishers. We'd all the edits done over Christmas. So that's the timeline, really, I suppose, of it. But I maybe started writing it in 2018 sometime. So it took me a long time to write. And there were a lot of, sort of deadlines missed with it. And that was because sometimes just the overwhelming waves of grief, I had nothing to say because I was too busy trying to survive it.
Yeah.
And there are layers to that, in that when Dara died, she left a 2.5-year-old child, and myself and my two sisters are his guardians. So our own lives, as well as our life as Dara's sister, our own lives changed as we became overnight responsible for this child. So there's so much to do. There was, an investigation at the time that's concluded now, but there was an investigation at the time. There's so many things going on, and so much of those things bring roaring in those big waves of grief. And so I had to let those waves subside before maybe coming back in to write about a piece about, maybe there are people now, we're talking in coming up to December, and there are people now who will be approaching their first Christmas without somebody they love. So going in even to write that piece about I called it all the firsts and all the lasts. Yeah. Because whenever you have that first Christmas or that first birthday or that first Sunday or whatever it is without the person you love, your mind is brought right back to the last Christmas and the last Sunday and the last birthday with the person you love. So I would write about those, but I had to live them first and understand them and survive them. And then maybe the piece on the writing was about sharing some of that. Immensely cathartic. And Gill, as a publisher, Gill Books were incredible, and they allowed me to write the afterword, which was really, it was about Dara. It was just about Dara, and it was just a beautiful thing that they allowed me do. So cathartic, but desperately hard. Some of it just desperately hard to write too. But I don't regret it. When I get those emails on that, as I said, sometimes daily basis, I got 3 yesterday, for example, and it makes me think it was the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Can a psychologist be their own psychologist?
Well, so my feeling on that is a dentist doesn't pull their own teeth.
True.
So for me, I went to see somebody. Does everybody who's bereaved or grieving or mourning losses, and be clear, we mentioned the pandemic earlier. This is a pandemic that's characterized by loss. So, a loss of the life we had before, all of those kind of things. So there's a lot of grief in around now, even if people haven't been bereaved in this time. I've distracted myself by my answer. What was my, oh yes. So not everybody needs to see a psychologist or bereavement counselling or something. For me, my marriage had ended at the time that Dara died, and she had introduced us. So there was something so sad about the end of that around the time of the end of her life. It kicked up a lot of stuff, I suppose, around the fertility piece with me, and obviously then Dara's death. So for me, there was a lot of big stuff going on, and I did go to see somebody, and it was one of the best things I ever did. He had that ability to see the things that I could not see because I was so close to them. It's like your hand right up here. You can't really see the lines on your hand when it's right up to your face. And as I said, that bit about a dentist, not pulling their own teeth. So my feeling is there are bits and pieces around my profession that have been immensely helpful to me. Well, would I be, or do I be, or can I try to be my own psychologist? No.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. It was just one of those ones where I wondered, was it a stupid question? But I'm glad that
it's a great question.
Thank you very much.
And I would say it's an important question because one of the things is key is to understand that, you know, as human beings, we might look different. We have different, you know, experiences, gene pools, you know, goals and everything in life. But at our core, we are so similar. We are the same. We hurt, we bleed, we laugh, we cry, we feel. And whether you are, wherever you are in your life, in terms of your age, in terms of what you're doing in life, you're not going to get away from those feelings. They're there. So having that skill set is one thing, but you still need to feel the feelings. And sometimes we need that guidance from somebody else, and that we can't just have that objectivity with ourselves.
I was asked this question a few weeks ago. Someone asked me to ask someone when I found someone to ask the question about if someone that they know is struggling, that they may not know how to approach that person or the situation. What advice could you give on that?
Yeah. So I think the starting point on that is that it depends on, is the person struggling and seeing themselves that they struggle? Is it somebody who's actually naming themselves that I'm having a hard time, I'm really struggling with X, Y, and Z? Or is it you looking at somebody and assuming a struggle?
Yeah.
So there's your starting point. Look at the difference between a fact and a feeling. Is it factually that somebody is saying, I need help, I'm, you know, or is it my feeling looking at them through my own lens? And get that started from the get-go. If it is that somebody, you know, is struggling with something in their life and they alert you to that by whatever means, the temptation is to go in as human beings and we want to fix it.
Yeah.
Step away from that temptation and understand instead, there's a brilliant expression that says, if you cannot look on the bright side, or I think it's when you cannot look on the bright side, I will sit with you in the dark. So it's understanding that if somebody you like or love is struggling with something in their life, one of the most powerful things that you can do is to be with them in that struggle. I don't mean move in with them. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be a 24/7 piece, but it means maybe about hearing them, not trying to dismiss them. So sometimes somebody will mention a struggle and what they're told is, actually, it'll be okay. And people try to rush in with the reassurance piece. Often what they need is for us to just shut up and let them say it. Let them do what you talked about in the space with Fiona, which is the verbalize it, the safe bit. So somebody's mentioning their struggle. I want you to, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. I want you to use it in that proportion. And to maybe say to somebody, okay, I hear you. Is it stuff you'd like to talk to me about? Do you want to tell me about it? Or do you just need me to know that this is a tough time for you? And then shut up.
Yeah.
And see what they say.
There's many ways. And I think, you know, when I go back to myself, when I was really, really struggling with depression and anxiety, and I think if my mom sat with me, that now this is just me, obviously, we talked about this, but we're all different. But if the person was sitting next to me, I felt, like you say, in a safe space, that would lead to me eventually turning around and saying, look, this is it, you know, and it's like not coming out immediately and declaring what's wrong. But I think it's that idea of being allowed just that little bit of time, knowing that you have someone's ear and that it'll come out eventually. And that the quote you said about sitting with someone in the dark is a perfect, you know, example of that.
Yeah, and it's the bit there about, you know, creating the space where they know that whatever they say is okay. Because often what will happen there, and you have to be careful on this one, in that sometimes the person who is struggling with whatever they're struggling with may feel themselves, I don't want to say that to you because I'm then going to burden you, you know, and you are somebody who maybe is close to me. So why would I pass on that ball of fire to you? So there's something there about, you know, they say something that indicates a struggle and you say, okay, I hear you, I'm listening. Would you like to talk about it? Do you want us to chat about it? And to maybe say, you know, you can say anything to me. I want you to know that it will never go further. I'm not going to gossip around the place. If you feel like you'd like to chat, I'm here. And to see what happens and stay quiet. And then sometimes it can be that what the person's actually looking for is information. Maybe they need some help in finding a service that is right for them. And that's what they're looking for. Maybe they just need to get the thoughts out of their head, you know? And what they don't need you to do is to hop straight to the fixing bit of here's what you need to do.
Yeah.
What they don't need you to do is to tell them about how this happened to you 3 weeks ago, or how, you know, Bob's cousin's aunt's sister had this and is now blah, blah, blah. They just need that space to be allowed. Get it out.
Yeah.
And the trick there for you listening is no judgment.
Yeah. Thank you very much for answering that, Niamh, because it was one that I wanted to eventually get to. And I'm glad that you were here for it. What do you like to do in your spare time? We're changing course here altogether.
So I love anything to do with theatre, music, concerts, comedy, musicals. You know, I love it. I mean, somewhere like the Bord Gosh Theatre, the Olympia Theatre, the Abbey Theatre, you know, anything like that, Vicar Street, I don't care. Yeah. Anything like that. I love it. And I love, I'll tell you what I miss now with the pandemic is so many times, and actually makes me think of Dara, because we've been to say to you too in Croke Park. So many times standing in Croke Park in the middle of a crowd, there's just people all around you. You're in the middle of this crowd. This music that you love is on and you're singing your lungs out. Now I'd clear a room if I sang. So, you know, it's lovely if it's in Croke Park. But just that sense of just in that moment, nothing else matters. You're alive. You're all singing the one song. There's this kind of feeling of togetherness. I love that. As you can hear, utterly love that.
It's funny when you talk about large crowds, and the first thing I think is, God, no, not a large crowd. But I get what you mean about concerts when I can get to them and when I'm in the space and the music starts. Because I saw you two in Croke Park, which might have been the same night as yourselves.
Yeah.
But the once the music kicks in and the crowd doesn't become anything to me anymore, it becomes a noise rather than a kind of something like that's oppressive, you know, around me that's kind of bugging me. But once it becomes part of the music and the roar, it is a magical thing. And you know, I can fully understand that. And obviously, you're mad into your arts. And are you a fan of West Side Story? Actually,
do you know of all the musicals, I've never seen it.
Do you know that's gas? Do you know why that's gas? Because because I've seen quite a few myself. I would consider that the best.
Yeah, I mean, what is wrong with me? Why haven't I seen it? I even said to my two sisters the other day, something came up and It's a Wonderful Life was on. And I said, oh, I've never seen that. The two of their heads swung around as if to say, in fact, I think they actually did say, what is up with you? How have you got to 53 and you've never seen that? So I've never seen it. No. So those things have to be, I think, rectified. But I think anything where it's around, for me, it's about, you know, film would be another thing I love. It's about anything where you feel alive. I can feel those days where I've been in Croke Park at a match, not just a concert, at a match. And there's these tribal you know, crowds, these supporters of the different places in their colours with their gear chanting, and it shivers down the back of my spine. So anything like that, I think that gets me and grabs me and makes me feel alive, I like to do. And I shall rectify It's a Wonderful Life and West Side Story to those ends.
It's so weird that you said It's a Wonderful Life. Literally 2 days ago, somebody texted me. We obviously it was a conversation, but over text, and they told me they hadn't seen It's a Wonderful Life, and I was like, "What? You have to no." But we get carried away. That we're like, "I can't believe you haven't seen it." But it's. I asked about West Side Story because there is a remake coming out. Steven Spielberg's doing a remake of it. I think it's out in January, February, but. Please watch the original first.
I was going to say that I will definitely watch the original. And I think even on that one, books are something else I love. Absolutely and utterly love books. And I would tend to go, like I mentioned earlier, I smell books in bookshops. Well, not now. I would have before COVID, but now I don't go smelling books now. But even books. So if a film was coming out, I probably normally would read the book first and do that. Yeah. So even with this one, I'll make sure to see the first one before the remake comes out.
I try to do it as well. Niamh, where can people find you actually?
Niamh Fitzpatrick, psychology.ie. It's kind of boring, but it's my name and what I do, so it's the easiest way to find.
You're on Twitter as well.
I love Twitter.
You do love Twitter, don't you? But I follow you, and I like your Twitter account. It's great.
Yeah, thanks. I think with Twitter, social media gets such a bad reputation, and understandably so. Sometimes there's some really, truly horrific stuff happens there. I think I've been lucky in that I have a space where have I been trolled? Yes. Have I been blocked? Yes. Do I need to block? Yes. But in the main, I am surrounded by and part of, is better expression, I am part of a community, and that community around psychology, or especially the community around grief, just immense people in terms of the generosity to others. And so being part of that is incredible. And I find the ability to just put something out there and have other people, you'll see often when I put something up about grief, that others will come in their replies to my comment to other people. And you see these conversations and somebody saying, gosh, I never knew that, and helping one another out. It has a bad reputation sometimes, obviously, but it also has a really powerful place, I think, for those of us who are fortunate to have that experience online. So yes, I think my handle is @nfitspsychology. On Twitter is where I'm at.
So everybody get over there and follow Niamh. Niamh, you've been a wonderful guest.
Well, you've been a wonderful podcast host, and I don't. If I didn't think that, I would have said thank you. I wouldn't have said anything, but I know you have. Thanks a million.
Thank you so much. Listen, stick with me for 1 minute. I'll close this out, get a quick photo with you, and then we can get about our day. It's lovely and wet outside, and we can light the fires and all we do. Okay. Thank you very much to John Francis for all his technical help that I can't do. I always thank my mom, my dad, my granddad, Jer and Calvin. Someone said the other day that they really liked that. That's why I put it in there, because it's very important to me. Subscribe to YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Follow me, Niamh. Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google Podcasts, etc. As always, thanks everyone for tuning in. And Niamh, thanks again.
You're welcome.
Everyone else, take care, and we will chat to you next week. Bye.